Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Suparang Sutarit, the fourth year student here at PGVIM. I would like to invite you all to join in welcoming Dr. Graham McKenzie for this very interesting topic we're having here. No quality without equality. How a more inclusive curatorial practice supports artistic quality. So let's figure out together how more diverse, inclusive, and sustainable approaches to sound and music curation could lead to a higher artistic qualities with Dr. Graham McKenzie, the artistic director and chief executive for the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival. So please welcome.
Thank you very much. Do I need the microphone? I don't think so.
For the
Do you? You need me to use the microphone? Okay. Okay. Thank you for coming along and welcome. Much appreciated. I'm always interested in the dynamics of who sits where at a talk. So we've got all the people there who sat at that side who are hedging their bets and think they can get out very quickly and easily. They can slip away if I'm boring. We've got all the people over here who think, well, maybe if he's dull, I can just nod off a little bit and catch up in my sleep. And then the people here, these seats are for the people who are punished by coming in late. So that always seems to me the dynamics of where people choose to sit at these things. Yes, you see, you're late, so I started. You have to sit there at the front. I'll try and speak slowly because some of you might have heard already that I'm Scottish. Therefore, my English, I don't really speak English very well. I speak Scottish, but I'll try and speak slowly. And I'm going to talk about Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival, or as we prefer to call it, HCMF, because by the time you say Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival several times, you've lost the will to live. And actually, when I started at Huddersfield, I very much wanted to change the name because I didn't really want a festival that was defined by the name in terms of the genre and what it was. But I soon realised actually the festival had been going for so many years and was quite renowned worldwide that I couldn't really sort of change the name. So we shortened it to HCMF, and that's what you'll hear me talking about. It's the largest festival of contemporary, new and experimental music in the UK. It's 10 days. Every November. And I guess all the great composers of the 20th century have been there, and the 21st century, of course. But Stockhausen was there twice, Cage was there, Boulez was there, Messiaen was there. And they all rocked up to this very small industrial town in the north of England. There's a beautiful photograph in the archive of Stockhausen, Cage and Boulez in the local Pizza Hut, which is a very cheap pizza chain. I don't know if you have it here. But at that time, it was the only place really to eat in Huddersfield was this pizza house chain. And it's still there. And I went along and asked if we could put a plaque up to mark the fact that they had been there. And they said, well, we'll have to ask head office. And the message came back from their head office to say, we have no idea who any of these people are, so no. And that was that. I'm just going to show a little 1-minute film of the festival from last year. So you may have noticed a very promising local musician and composer in that clip, and we were very blessed to have Anatai join the festival last year as a delegate to the festival. The music in that film was by the Australian Art Orchestra with two Indigenous songmen, David and Daniel Wilfred. And we put them together with the saxophonist was Kath Roberts, and the violinist who you saw right at the start was Mandira Desarum, two UK musicians. And it's part of a programme we run with different cultures, which we call Creative Intensive Workshops. And the process for that project was to, first of all, have some members of AAO and Daniel and David come to Huddersfield. And we made an open call for British musicians to join those intensive workshops and put on a short performance. The idea was always that Kath and Mandira would be the mainstays of the commissioned project. And they travelled then back to Australia with AAO and carried on with developing the piece and performances in Australia. And then all of it came back to Huddersfield in November and was premiered there. I've been the artistic director at HCMF for, this will be my 18th festival this year, which I said I would do 3 when I took the job, but somehow I'm still there. And I remember just before I started, I read about the festival in The Wire magazine that some of you might know. And they called the festival a hardy perennial. And I thought, a hardy perennial? A perennial is something that no matter how much you neglect it and try and beat it down, it pops up every year. And I had no real desire to be in charge of a perennial, a hardy perennial. And I guess also prior to Huddersfield, I was the director of CCA, Centre for Contemporary Art in Glasgow, which is primarily a visual art space, although it did cover the other forms and art forms, including music. And one thing that really I noticed coming from contemporary visual art to contemporary music was that while in contemporary visual art, you were always dealing with the next or the current generation coming out of the art schools. In contemporary music, publishers were always phoning me up and telling me it was someone's 80th birthday or the 100th anniversary of something or other. And it seemed I just couldn't reconcile that with contemporary in my head. And at the same time, the sector, contemporary music sector, certainly in the UK, was having all these angst-driven conversations about how we refresh audiences. How do we get younger people into concert halls to listen to contemporary music? And it seemed to me that it was a very simple step as a starting point to that. And that was to put a younger generation of people on the stage, invest in the work by younger composers. And in my second festival, we asked the Dutch-based composer Yanis Kyriakides to be composer in residence. And Yanis was in his 30s at that point. And I remember being at a press launch for the programme that year, and a very angry member of the press kind of stood up and said, "How can you possibly have this young composer as composer in residence when there's all these neglected masters whose work we never hear?" Note the use of the term masters. We'll come back to that in a minute. And my answer to that was, do you want to create another generation of neglected composers, or shall we hear what people are doing now as they are doing it? And that was actually a bit of a starting point of change. You know, at that point, the festival had been going however many years, and about 5% of the audience was under 30. Today, 38% of last year's festival was under 30. And it was also a starting point to widen the definition of contemporary music, because I felt the festival had got very staid in looking at one particular area of contemporary music practice, which was composition, and composition in a particular way for concert halls. And so by bringing in those younger musicians who were working across genres, from noise music to being comfortable working in galleries, improvisation and performing, we really then were able to widen the music, the definition of contemporary music at the festival, from noise music at one end to orchestral music at the other, and all the mainstream musics in between, including improvisation, electronic music, sound art, installation based works. And that was really the start, I think, for me of diversifying the programme and also diversifying audiences, because it also brought in audiences that were interested in those types of music. The other thing I felt that the festival really needed to create more opportunities in new territories for younger generation UK-based composers. I think the festival was very well known, but it brought a lot of music to the UK. It didn't always create opportunities for music to go the other way. And we set a kind of sort of 10-year programme at that point with British Council to look at bringing people to Huddersfield who we felt we could develop relationships with in terms of commissioning, co-commissioning, co-producing and touring music. And it kind of worked. Because of the geography of Huddersfield, everybody's staying in the same hotels, everybody's walking from concert to concert. So it became a great place for networking. And we talk about the opening weekend, in a sense, as not just a place to immerse yourself in music, but a place to do business in that sense as well. And it's also a very densely packed festival. I mean, if you come to HCMF, then you will see 4 or 5 concerts a day. And on a Monday, actually, you'll see about 20, but we'll come back to that as well. The other thing that was in my head, though, in terms of all this change that we were trying to instigate, was very much contemporary music seemed to me at that point. Again, it was very male-dominated. I saw a lot of certain age group white men on the stage, and I saw a lot of similar age group white men in the audience. And for me, that needed to change a little bit as well. And I think a key movement in 2017, PRSF, the Performing Rights Society, introduced a programme called Key Change. And Key Change was to encourage festivals and music organisations to include 50% women in programming and staff and other aspects of the music industry. HCMF was an early signatory to that. I didn't feel we had a problem when I looked at our stats, and so certainly to reach 50% was never a problem. And but it's now 600 festivals, I think, worldwide. And I say it was never a problem because actually, I think particularly in the UK, over the last 10 years, I think many of the most interesting composers have actually been women. If I think about, the ones that I would, someone says, who's interested in the UK? The names I would rhyme off are generally women. And I kind of have a theory about that. And my theory about it is that primarily the staff makeup in the universities and the conservatories teaching music are male. You'd be very lucky to find a department. You certainly won't find a department where women, female, would be in the majority. And actually, I think that for females, for women going to study, they actually have to work a little bit harder to be noticed. They have to set the bar a little bit higher to be noticed. And I think it makes them much more competitive and therefore also much more interesting in the music that they're producing. So Key Change was a key moment. still exists as a programme at PRS. And actually now it's moved to something that they call Beyond Gender. And there's a focus on wider misrepresented communities. And they advocate for actions that represent gender-expansive artists of all races, ethnicities, disabilities, and social classes. And I think it said in that film you just watched, I think last year, we were something like 62% of works that we presented was created by gender minority artists, and 83% of events featured women or minority artists in some shape or form. And I'm just going to have a drink of water. So talk amongst yourselves for 30 seconds. Gosh, it's so hot in this country. An interesting coming after key change. Another thing that started was not just looking at 50-50 representation of women in things like publicly funded festivals, but it kind of started a process where funding bodies were demanding a lot more in terms of data collection from organisations they were funding. And so coming after the gender equality, it led us very much to diversity, and again having to look at diversity in all its forums and produce data and stats on that. And actually you can see that in the programme as well. 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been able to present the Australian Art Orchestra and that project in the way that we did. And yet it was heralded by several critics as the highlight, or certainly one of the highlights of the festival last year. And so again, the diversity brings in different musics, it brings in different audiences. And you're able then to better represent the communities that you're there to serve. I think the only thing I'd say around diversity, though, is that it slightly leads to perhaps a slight laziness in the way that that's been handled still to me, and that diversity really, it's a kind of easy fix if people say, okay, how do I represent diversity, and I do it by skin colour. That's a kind of easy one for programmers to look at. But that's really not diversity if, people of different ethnicities are coming to the festival, performing at the festival, or on the contemporary music scene, but actually they're all from the same class. If you were to look at, the current UK government, you could say that's one of the most diverse governments we've ever had in the UK. The current first Asian Prime Minister, and we've got the Home Secretary, who is the daughter of immigrants who came to the UK. And yet, this is the most right-wing, racist, anti-immigrant government that I've ever seen in the UK in my lifetime. So, the ethnic background in that case is no barometer of diversity. And it really is not diversity if what you're doing is looking at skin colour, but what you're doing is bringing in the same class of people who were able to go to the same universities with the same financial opportunities and backgrounds. And I think coming next, really, in the pressures to look at data collection and representation in the UK, it's interesting that they've now started to look at socio-economic models. And I think that's very good in the sense that it underpins the two other pillars in terms of getting a better representation. And it's harder to do. It's a little bit clumsy in terms of looking at the data collection. And right now, the Arts Council will ask things when we're putting in evaluation after projects and after the festival of kind of trying to assess, who was the highest earner in your family when you were growing up? And were they white-collar worker, were they factory worker, were they office worker? They try and get a sense of the class representation. One other project, I should mention in that regard as well, is there's a European-funded project that we're part of and we're founder part of called Sounds Now. And Sounds Now is looking at curation, really, as a means of promoting inclusion in contemporary music and sound art by bringing new voices and new perspectives, and it targets the wider long-term impact of diverse and contemporary music creation in its audiences, and it's mapping that across all its programs, which include the development of new work, productions, commissions, but also seminars, symposium, workshops, what we call curators' labs that are happening in different parts of Europe, working with younger people. And you can find out more about Sounds Now just at sounds-now.eu if you want to have a look at what they are doing. The other thing about looking at inclusion is, Huddersfield is a small town. It's not a rich town, it's quite a poor town. The university where the festival was founded in 1978 was a polytechnic at that time. And so we're very aware in terms of access to the festival in relation to income and low income, and how we involve communities in what we are doing. Some of that is about, I think last year 50% of our events were free. And we do this crazy day on a Monday, which I referred to earlier, called HCMF Shorts. And the idea is we present a whole festival in a day, and everything is entirely free. And Anatai told me earlier that people had asked her, why have you got so many concerts on the Saturday? And it's because she came to Huddersfield last year. And I was talking about HCMF Shorts and having this marathon session on a single day. But the idea is to try and give people a sample of the whole festival in a day. So every concert's 20 minutes to maybe 30, some 40 minutes. And that also deals with the idea that people don't be afraid to see a concert and thinking, I'm going to get stuck in here for hours and I hate it and I've got to get out. So they know everything's short. There are no VIPs. The way it works, we're in different spaces throughout the town. And you go along to one concert, and if you don't get in, that's only going to be 20 minutes. So you go to the next one and you're first in the queue. Sometimes I don't get in if I'm talking too much to somebody. My staff are all under strict instruction that there's no special privilege for the director. I don't get in either if I'm not there on time. And that really came about because we had this very busy international weekend. And then it's like, but when then people leave, the industry leave, most of the festival we still got to go. How do you keep the energy up? We still got like 7 days to go. My technical team thought, actually, why don't we just not do anything on a Monday, maybe just one concert? And I didn't like that idea, so I decided we're going to have a whole festival in a day. And we're going to represent the different types of music that we put on so that people who maybe can't come for financial reasons or don't quite know what to expect and are a little bit afraid can come along on the Monday. We now get about 3,000 people who come on the Monday, and it runs from 12 midday to 12 midnight. And people come with their flasks and their sandwiches, and they go from concert to concert. So that's one way. We also have a year-round learning and participation program where we work with different aspects of the local community, whether that's with asylum seekers, refugees, and community centres around Huddersfield. We work in prisons that are local to Huddersfield as well. And we try and, again, in terms of looking at accessibility, we've just done a programme of short videos aimed at mothers and toddlers about creating music. There's about 10 of them, and they're up on our YouTube channel so that parents can just access that anytime that they want. And we've also just put up another video in conjunction with Sangam Festival, which is an Asian festival in the town. And we've put up some short videos, each again, 5-7 minutes, focusing on different types of Asian instruments and saying a little bit about their history and a demonstration of what they sound like. And through that way, we're able to not just introduce the wider community to the festival and say, come along as an audience member, but starting to look at ways in which they can participate in the events and in the festival as well. There's still a kind of issue about communication, and I hear a lot in contemporary music, people saying, you know, we have to be better at telling people about this music. And yeah, we do, but I often think that they don't really want to tell people. They want to compromise in how they tell people, I find. I still find people talking about contemporary new music in a very academic way. And that's only part of it. You know, and there has to be different stories that we begin to tell about the music and think about how we get people interested in the music and the creation of these new works. Sound art and installation-based work is a really good way to do that because you can place it in parts of the community, in parts of the town, parts of communities and buildings that people will come across it in their everyday lives. Working with artists and communities as well, you can get people involved in those projects in a very meaningful way. And actually, through some of the sound art work we've commissioned at the festival, you can start to give a voice to marginal communities as part of that artwork. And later on this afternoon, you're going to hear from an artist we worked with a lot, Claudia Molitor, who's sitting there, who is going to talk about particularly a project, Listen to My World, which was commissioned by Sounds Now and gave a voice to people representing marginal communities in different parts of Europe, Greece, Belgium, Denmark, the UK, obviously, and some other, Finland. And it's a very good way, I think, of getting involvement and addressing communication and addressing how you give people a sense of what you're trying to do within contemporary and new music. The other way of doing it, I think, as well, and that's partly what sound art does, but I think the important thing there is also is storytelling. You know, people say to me, how do you get people involved in new music? How do you talk about new music? Well, partly you tell people stories. Everybody loves stories. You know, if you think about so many art practices that have come down through generations, oral traditions, and telling stories as a way to get people interested. You know, when I do a lot of mentoring work, and when I'm talking to young composers, one of the things I'm often talking about is when you come out of learning, when you come out of academies, I'm very rarely interested in the sort of things that you were told were interesting there. I'm not really interested in theory very much. I'm interested in who you are as an artist. I'm interested in the person behind the work. And I'm interested in why you're doing that work now and how it fits into where you want to go next. So stories are a great way of doing that. And according to my iPad, I've got 2 minutes left, and I'm going to finish with a story as a way of, I think, highlighting that. The Danish Fluxus artist Henning Christensen, some of you may know. When he was ill towards the end of his life, he told his family he didn't want to be cremated, he wanted to be buried. And so when he passed away, they respected his wish, and he was indeed buried. At the ceremony, as he was about to be lowered down into the ground, they suddenly realized, the mourners watching and his family, that the coffin was too big and it wasn't going to fit into the grave that had been dug. And so people were kind of wondering what to do. What do I do next? And then one gentleman who was one of the congregation went to his car and he came back with a saw. And he started to saw the end off the coffin. And there was a bit of protest and people were horrified and saying, stop. And he said, no, there's nothing else to do. And he sawed the end off the coffin. And the coffin was lowered into the grave. And Henning Christensen was buried. And it was about a week later, there was an announcement that Henning Christensen had set this up. And the only person who knew was the man with the saw. And it was because Henning Christensen wanted to be an artist all the way till he was lowered into his grave. And that was his very last performance. And we done this a performance by Henning Christensen last year in the town centre of Huddersfield, in the shopping centre. And this performance was called 100 Blows Against the War Monkeys. And so it consisted of someone with a very large hammer. It was Henning Christensen's son, Torbjörn Christensen, we asked to do it, hitting a piece of metal, which was amplified. He hit it 100 times, and there was a count going on, an amplified count for each blow. And we're doing this in the shopping centre. And so people were wandering past, and they start asking, what's this guy doing? And so I told many people that Henning Christensen story to get them interested and involved. And it was quite interesting that I was in Huddersfield about 3 months ago, having a coffee in a cafe. And this man came over to me and he said, I came to the festival on the Monday, and you were doing that crazy thing with hitting a hammer against a bit of metal. And he said, and you told me a story about this guy, this artist who got lowered into the ground. A guy was cutting a bit off the end of his coffin, and he said, great story. I've told that story so many times. And then he said, is it true? And I said, of course it was. Of course it's true. I'm finished. You can ask me questions. It is a true story. Just in case you were wondering. Yeah. Yeah, it was one of those things, yeah. He wondered whether it was just, a good story, a good wheeze, or The other beautiful thing about that, actually, is that then I was presented with a really small hammer as a replica. And the idea is that if anyone else wants to do that piece, I have to go and present them with that hammer before they do the piece. So I've sent that story about the hammer and the fact that I have to go to present it to all sorts of exotic parts of the world. If anyone wants to do it like in Wales or something, then no, I'm not available. But if they want to do it in maybe Bangkok, I'm available.
Definitely would love to get that hammer or the second version of it. So any questions or comments from our audience here? Yes, please. Graham asking Graham.
Graham wants to ask Graham.
Thank you, Graham. Would it matter if the story wasn't true?
I never think the truth should get in the way of a good story.
Well, that's what I was just, yeah.
But that is a true story. I never think there's any harm in embellishing anything about a story if you... Oh, sorry. There's never any harm with embellishment, but that one is absolutely true to the letter. But it's very interesting that the guy asked me. He recognised that, well, maybe actually,
Yeah.
You're just embellishing it a little. But no, it was true down to the last detail.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Maybe you just came to ask because it
Yeah.
made him crazy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I have two questions, actually. One is a continuation of the story lineage. Since the festival has been around since 1978, are there stories or urban myths that carry through that the programming reciprocates?
Oh gosh, of local stories. There's a question. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, the founder of the festival, Richard Steinitz, who founded it in 1978, still comes to the concerts. You know, I'm actually the only the third director in its 46 year history. There's lots of stories about the festival before my time. Not sure. I'm trying to think of any, and as I'm trying to think if there's an example of a local story that we've then interpreted. There's another great story about Stockhausen. The first time he came to Huddersfield. And he was rehearsing in the town hall, which is a very grand, palatial-like building. And the ensemble were up on the stage, and Stockhausen was at the sound desk in the middle of the hall. And for some reason that no one knows why to this day, the sound desk was under a chandelier, and the chandelier came loose and fell from the ceiling, and people say it was almost like they were watching this tragedy unfold in slow motion. And as it came down, Stockhausen saw it, slightly moved his shoulder, and it crashed to the floor beside him, and he carried on with the rehearsal. I never batted an eyelid. And again, I'm told that's a true story, but I wasn't there. You know, and like that gentleman, I've asked many times to Richard, but he tells me that's a true story. I think in terms of an urban myth or something, I can't really think of. Probably we've told a few stories. I mean, Huddersfield used to be famous for its cotton mills, and that was the main industry. And so we have, I suppose, we've developed a few sound art projects that have involved textiles because of that. And I guess we've told people stories. Individual worker stories through the festival as part of that programme. There's a festival called Woven, another festival in the town that we contribute to quite a lot. So I guess we'd have contributed in that way. There's also a really interesting story about the last surviving cotton mill in Huddersfield, which is a place called Bates Mill, and we now use that as a key venue. And in 2006, I started in January, and I was wandering the streets in the rain and the cold because I needed a different type of venue to the ones the festivals were using, which was a church converted to a concert hall and an old theatre. And every time I saw an large empty warehouse building, I knocked on the door. And if anyone came to the door, I usually got as far as, I run a contemporary music festival before they shut the door in my face. But one time, this guy opened the door, a guy called Nigel Bates. And the factory is owned by him and his brother, Richard Bates. And I asked them if they could had any space in this complex. And they said yes. There's a shed that we use for storing cotton at certain parts of the year. And, we do a lot of photo shoots take place in it as well. And we did use it the first year, and there was kind of rain coming in the roof and all sorts of things. And since then, it's turned into one of our key venues, and we improve it a little bit each year. What I love about the venue is, though, that if you come to a concert in Bates Mill, the two guys behind the bar serving you a drink are the two brothers who own the whole complex. And I think that's beautiful. You've got the factory owners who are serving the audience and get involved. One of them takes photographs and has documented everything from the last 18 years. And the other one is a collector of, you would call it junk, really. He loves going around skips and rubbish heaps and finding interesting objects. And he's always trying to get them on stage somehow. He's always trying to say to an ensemble, this would look perfect on the stage, you know. And so that's Richard's aim in life now, the other brother, is to get objects that he's collected somewhere on a stage at the festival. So that's a nice story as well.
That's a great project, thank you.
Did you have a second question?
The second one was, throughout the length of the festival live dates, how many venues or spots do you program? We've got probably about 4 key venues in the town.
And then in the short stay, we'll use all sorts of strange, small spaces as well. But I find it really interesting, and not in a good way, that in 45 years, this year will be the 46th, neither the town nor the university where we're based. I'm not employed by the university, but I'm based there because the festival was founded there. No one's built a venue. And I don't mean a big concert hall. I just mean a space. Because I think one of the things in Huddersfield for me that's lacking is that when you come out the station and you walk through the town, there's not a building that you can point to and say, I will find art in there. It's all kind of hidden, you know? And I think that's quite unusual. I think it's especially unusual in a town that's had the largest contemporary music festival for the last 46 years, and now one of the biggest festivals in Europe. And beyond, I mean, the other thing that we do quite a lot now is we also do these pop-up festivals in other parts of the world, where I maybe curate 3 days with some UK-based musicians and work with local musicians as well. And it's very much meant to be a two-way process so that some of those local musicians will come back with the work to HCMF. And we've done 2 in Mexico City, we've done 1 in Rio, we've done 1 in the Lebanon, we've done 1 in Philadelphia, we've done 1 in Moscow, and we're currently talking about doing 1 next year in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and we're also sort of in conversations about doing something in Indonesia as well. And we'd love to do 1 in Bangkok. Anatai, where are you? We'd love to do 1 in Bangkok. So yeah, you know, and that's really interesting as well. And so you get this worldwide festival that's talking about Huddersfield, this small town. And it just seems to me that there should be that investment in a building. We very nearly got there. There was plans to take an old market building, which actually really interesting. This old market building, the roof was exactly the same as the roof in the Phillips building when Xenakis was the curator. It's almost like modelled on it. And we get very, very close, and it was part of a 10-year plan for the town. And then COVID came along. And it's just put everything, you know, I mean, the local authorities, just COVID and the town and everything, just, you know, almost bankrupt. So it's almost like starting again. But I've told them as an incentive, I've told the town and the university as an incentive, I'm not leaving until they build a building. So, you know, so I'd see that as quite a good incentive after 18 years. They think, oh gosh, the only way I'm going to get rid of him if he builds a building. Any more questions?
I actually have one.
Yes.
Because I was there first time in 2001, and I was told that this is the place. It's almost like a Jerusalem for composers. You have to be there as part of doing a study in the UK. You have to be there, and I can hear the stories change a little bit, and especially that now you can hear that the journey has become something like a pop-up place, so it's spreading around the world instead of a place that everybody has to just go to one place. So my questions, the first part will be, how do you feel, what is your opinion on that first understanding of people, the story that people are saying that is the place that you have to go? And the second questions will be, how do you see the story unfold in the coming years?
Okay. I think that, you know, I very much try to promote that in the UK, that people have to come to Huddersfield. So the one thing we don't do is we don't take elements of the festival to other parts of the UK. So I've been asked a couple of times by venues if we do a version of the festival in London. That's an absolute no for me, because the press and media are very lazy. And if it's in London, they're not going to come. So that's a no. I think, though, that actually, no, the other thing I should say, because I'm just looking outside, this is a little bit like the rain we get in Huddersfield in November, which is also really good for the festival as well, because, you know, if I've got 5 concerts on in a day and it's November and the rain like that, only it's colder, and it's a small town, you bet your life you're going to come to at least 4 of those 5 concerts, if not them all, because what else are you going to do? And what's really healthy about that is that you will come to things maybe that you don't know. Whereas in a city, people will go to concerts that they know. So what I always say, the perfect experience of coming to HCMF is if you come to something that you know and it lives up to your expectation. If you come to something that you don't know and you enjoy it, and if you come to something that you don't know and you absolutely hate it, but you feel good about yourself for trying it, those 3 things are the perfect Huddersfield experience. And the weather like this helps in that respect. In terms of, you know, I just think that the work that we've done in working with other cities, other communities, other countries, has really enriched the programme so much in Huddersfield. And I think, you know, one of the most interesting things at the moment is taking some of the use of traditional instruments, traditional storytelling, different cultures, and looking at how you frame that in a contemporary music setting, and also improvisation as well, in a way that's moved beyond the kind of terrible MTV fusion world, I think, and some of the most interesting music that's been produced. We've done a residency, a digital residency with an Indonesian sound artist called Rani Yanbak last year. And she then won the Orem Award, which is an award in the UK for women working with electronic music. And I have to say, in terms of the open call for that residency, I was blown away by so many of the musicians and composers and artists in Indonesia that applied for that residency. You know, some of the music and the musicianship was just incredible. And it's really opened me up to that part of the world a lot in terms of things that we want to do and promote and people we want to work with. So I feel we always get more out of it, and it enriches what we do in the programme so much. In terms of where contemporary music is going, I think there's a real change across Europe. There's a lot of festivals that are, you know, been going a long time in contemporary music, the real bastions of contemporary music. You know, I find them quite old-fashioned, quite boring. But I think there's a lot of festivals now, and a lot of the festivals we co-commission and co-produce with, I think are changing and are more open to this diversity of music, diversity of genres, and it's bringing new and different audiences into the music. And they're much more exciting. There's much greater kind of, you know, meeting of people and discussions and stories and everything else. You know, I was at a festival in Austria not so long ago, and to me it was a throwback to a kind of old-fashioned contemporary music festival. It was all these, you know, there was lots of younger generation artists and students, and this idea that they were there to worship these great masters just was something that, you know, for me it's got no place in the future of that music going forward. And I found it very difficult. I found it very strange. You know, there's a curator of the festival, and yet I hardly saw work by a woman composer in the 3-4 days I was there. I found that very strange as well. But I think there's a real change in the way that contemporary music is developing and opening up. I think sound art has been a large part of that. I see that represented across a lot more music festivals. I see much more diversity in the audiences, which is important. And right now I feel very optimistic. You know, I mean, it's almost like I said, you know, I didn't really want to refer to Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival, because I didn't like that name, because it was saying your contemporary music. I prefer to curate work that's in between the spaces of genres. So, you know, and there was all these other festivals at the time with wonderful names called Music Lovers Field Companion in Newcastle and things like that. And I thought, oh, I want a bit of that. But I soon realised I couldn't throw out the festival name, really. But it's kind of important to try not to get locked in to the genres, and we're very bad at doing that in music in particular. I was telling someone over a coffee earlier today that I saw a clip of the great Charles Mingus, the bass player, on American TV many years ago, and the presenter asking him, you know, what constitutes jazz? What do we mean by jazz? And Charlie Mingus sort of had a very long pause, and then he said, why don't you ask the MF that called it that in the first place? I don't know. Jazz music, you know, I'm a composer. I've never referred to it as jazz. And so I don't like, you know, when we pigeonhole music as being this, that, or something else. Did that answer your question? Was that just a long ramble?
Hi.
Hi.
We have all experienced COVID-19 and then difficulty of gathering in one place. So in your festival, how did you adapt such change? Or are you planning to open up a digital platform or, you know, ways to share your work online?
Now, there's a good question. How long have I got to answer that, Anitai? Very quickly, first thing is that we had to cancel the festival in 2020. But rather than put on the programme online and stream things, we commissioned a series of short film pieces that were meant then to be seen on screen. And we done the festival that way in 2020. In order to continue to try and support artists whose income had suddenly stopped in March 2020, we decided to redirect resources to commissioning new work, which was great, but we got slightly carried away and we commissioned 31 new pieces of work. The negative of that is I have to now, over the next years, find ways of putting on that work, plus still allowing for new work and new commissions. So that's one thing. The only thing we put on in 20 that was part of the original programme, we're very lucky that BBC Radio 3 record a lot of the festival and broadcast it. And it seemed to me that when everyone was jumping to streaming, there was a very effective and traditional and historic method of distributing sound to people who weren't in the space, and it was called radio. And in many ways, for me, that was a lot more satisfying than streaming. You know, there are certain instruments that don't sound very good. Most people are streaming things or looking at it on a laptop or a computer or something. And so that didn't strike me as very satisfying. The other thing is it brought about an inequality in the arts that isn't there in live programming necessarily. And I'll give you an example of that. So the Royal Opera House and the National Theatre could do a very professional production and broadcast that. Whereas a lot of small organisations and like HCMF, you know, you're there with your iPhone recording someone playing the cello in their kitchen because you don't have the money to compete with that. And that created an inequality that I didn't like. Streaming is a big thing though, and actually one thing that's a real contradiction in terms for me is that now at Arts Council of England, I have to have an environmental and sustainability policy. And at the same time, I have to have a policy that increases our digital offer. Now, I think these two things are a contradiction in many ways. And I'll tell you why. In 2019, in December 2019, an organisation called Reset.org, whose sole reason to exist is to work with companies working with new technology in a more sustainable way. They brought out a report in 2019 that said the use of digital technology now is doing more damage to the planet than the aviation industry ever could. Now, I'm not an expert, but I found that really interesting because, that was before we all spent half our life now in Zoom and Teams and all these things. Because it's now there's a bit of a naive and very simplistic thing in the UK, saying to arts organisations and artists, travel is bad, digital is good. Well, I think there's some doubts about that. And I think the reality now is a lot of organisations and festivals fly in the artists anyway, and they stream the concert. So there's an argument to say, actually, we're now doubling the impact on the environment. Because there's all that stuff in the cloud. It's not a natural cloud. It doesn't produce rain like that. It's all been powered to be there. So I've got severe concerns. Also, I don't really like... I never watch a concert being streamed. And the other interesting thing is the Europe Jazz Network. They commissioned some work, and they worked with 6 festivals in Europe towards the end of 2020, who all developed streaming programs. And the average time that people watched a concert online was 5.5 minutes. Because the way people use online, you're flicking around from site to site. Very few people actually sat on it for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes. Because that's not how people tend to use the internet or when they're sitting in front of their computer. So, and funding bodies are forever telling me that it's about, increasing the audience, How do we know? How do we know? You don't know what sort of attention you've got from someone who might have clicked on the screen and then went off to do their ironing, or they went to a bar and left it on. So I don't buy it particularly. And I'm I'm a little bit like a one-man anti-streaming concerts campaigner in the UK. So yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
I think you've got two, more than one person, so I think Dieter.
Okay, we have to get together and really get this campaign out there, Dieter. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we can continue this over the coffee. And we have already ordered the thunderstorm to start.
Yes.
So therefore, we have a little bit of kind of flood on the 5th floor.
Great.
Miraculously, we have that. So we have coffee brought to you by
wonderful,
the team.
Wonderful.
And
Anatai, you've seen rain like that in Huddersfield. I'm not joking. That's not an exaggeration.
But
yeah.
not on 5th floor. I think we beat you
but
on
not
that.
on the 5th floor. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and you might recognize that we actually arranged the chair in a completely different diversity, so please feel free to do a little bit of the musical chairs and change your places for the next sessions. First, thank you very much, Graham McKenzie, Director of STMF. There is a lot of things that I always learn from you, so thank you very, very much.
Thank you for listening to my incoherent ramblings. You've been very good and patient audience. Thank you.
It's a lesson to be learned, definitely. Yeah, the next session will start with the wonderful festival which involved in the